heroin. Riley Walden, the name that we chose for him, was a family name, means valiant warrior, and he had to be rescued from himself. We adopted Riley at 4 weeks. We couldn't get him at birth because he was born to a heroin-addicted mother. He detoxed there for 4 weeks in the hospital and then for another 4 weeks with us, where we bound him so tightly just to keep him from clawing his little body until it bled. He screamed day and night. In fact, before we adopted him, the social worker said, in looking at the hospital report, "Do you realize what a fussy baby this is? Are you sure you really can handle it?" Once the drugs were finally out of his tiny little body, he became the sweetest, most lovable child you've ever seen. He never really outgrew wanting to be rocked, cuddled, and his magnetic personality would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. Everyone wanted to be his friend, but as he got older, not all of the friends were good for him. When he was only 4, we would drop him at Sunday school, and we would hear everybody screaming, even if they were in the middle of the lesson, "Riley's here, Riley's here," and they would run to the door. Back then I laughed. Now I realize it later meant, "Riley's here, break out the beer, it's time to party." Smiley Riley lit up a room and our lives with indescribable joy. He grew up playing with his older brother and his younger sister, mostly outside, building forts, riding bikes, swimming in our neighbor's pool. They cooked new recipes in my kitchen, which I gave them free rein. I pretended to like them, even though the main ingredients were usually baking powder and salt. Riley and I loved doing art projects together. They ranged from life-size cardboard toothbrush and toothpaste costumes to small, itty-bitty little European 1800s dresses and suits. Even my mother got into the creative part of Riley by building him a G.I. Joe hospital, where he bound up all of his wounded soldiers with masking tape and took all of my lipstick to make blood. Whatever Riley did, he did it obsessively. He had a lifelong thing about kittens, but Dale was highly allergic, so we couldn't have one in the house. Instead, he carried Morris, a threadbare, one-eyed, stuffed cat. Very little stuffing left, everywhere he went. His birth mother gave a letter to us at the adoption. It said, "He comes from a very creative family, but with creativity comes weakness." And unfortunately, she was exactly right. Riley knew he was the product of 4 generations of addiction, and those were just the ones that we could count. All 4 of his maternal great-grandparents had died quite young of their addictions, some suicide, some overdoses. We warned him to be careful. He knew the risk. In fact, this is a quote from an essay he wrote when he was 10 years old. "I think you should stay drug-free and avoid violence to keep your body healthy from drugs. You could get brain damage, lung cancer, and changes in personality. There are many deaths a year from drugs, and because of the DARE program, I'm glad I won't be one." In the 9th grade, he also won the Just Say No poster contest for the entire state of Alabama. But Riley was an addict from the point of conception because of his birth mother. That didn't give him an excuse. It was just the thorn in his side that would always try to push him over the edge. A thorn to remind him in the midst of all these wonderful gifts from God that he was one step from a fall. All he had to do was cross that line once and he would begin a battle with addiction that would follow him for the rest of his life. Riley graduated from Briarwood Christian High School with a full ride to college and moved immediately at 17 into his own apartment. Not a good idea. He stopped going to church and he cut off all fellowship with his Christian friends. He made it so easy for Satan's lies to drown out God's still small voice. He didn't just cross the line, he broad jumped over it. And so it began. The 10 years spiraled down into the pit of hell, dragging everyone who loved him right along. At first it was just beer. Don't let anyone ever tell you that beer is not a gateway drug. quickly moved to pot. And then, after having surgery for a football injury on his leg, it was pain pills, Lortab, heroin in a prescription bottle. And finally, there were the needles, and the guilt, and the separation from the family he loved because of the guilt, and hiding from the God he loved because of the shame. Crouching behind a big fig leaf, hoping God, the hound of heaven, wouldn't catch his sin as he strolled through the garden, as if the God of the universe wouldn't know one of his own. Finally, the hiding turned to running, and he was in the wind. We begged his friends for help. We prayed. We cried out to God. Let him be the prodigal that comes to the end of himself. Raise the bottom so that there will be an end of himself. I finally gave him to God because I could do nothing. Open-palmed, I released him to God so he wouldn't have to pry him out of my hand. God had given him to me, but I had to give him back because there was nothing else I could do, and I had to trust God to heal him and make him well. I mentioned earlier that Riley had two weaknesses, and the second weakness was revealed in how he responded to the first. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul was humbled by his weakness, his thorn in the side, his messenger from Satan. Paul accepted God's refusal to remove it in God's explanation. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul said he would boast all the more gladly about his weakness, so that Christ's power could rest on him. For when I am weak, I am strong. Addiction was Riley's thorn, but he refused to let it humble him. And he refused to accept our offers, which turned to pleadings to get help. He was in denial that it was out of his control because of pride, and then hiding behind that pride, shame. He thought he could save himself, but you can't save yourself from yourself. Satan will tell you otherwise. Satan lies. Satan is the great deceiver. No one beats heroin but God.
Amen.
Every few months, Riley would surface, and we would plead with him to get help. The only charge he ever had was a youthful offender DUI charge when he was 19, but it followed him for 10 years and resulted in 5 arrests because he wouldn't complete the probation period of just showing up for drug testing. He couldn't make it 6 months. Rules, that includes laws, were just not made for him by this point, so he ignored them. It was that attitude that proved to be his undoing. Riley thought he could beat the heroin on his own. In fact, when we asked him why he had ever tried heroin in the first place, he said it was because he thought he could handle it. No one handles heroin. It's a monster, the destroyer of this generation, wrapping its ugly tentacles around the future and dragging everyone that it touches and that we love down. And it chokes them out. The ones we love. And Satan saw what Riley had the capability of doing for God if he allowed him to continue to live on earth. Satan was not happy and wanted him gone. He's the destroyer. Now, Satan does not decide when you die, but he can kill, steal, and destroy your future when you don't seek God's intervention. Riley thought he could go it alone because he did not want to give up 1 year of his life. Instead, he gave up all the years of his life. Had he gone to Teen Challenge on his scheduled entry day, August 28th of last year, he would now be 1 month from graduation and beginning a new drug-free life. Satan doesn't want you to be able to use your talents for God's glory either. He will try to tell you you can handle it like he did Riley, that you're strong. But that's a lie. Just like the lie that Satan whispered to Eve that brought sin into the world and death. And just like the lie he whispered over and over again to Riley. It is spiritual warfare. So be a warrior and fight. Riley was named Valiant Warrior, but he didn't fight hard enough. You must listen for God's voice, not Satan's. God's voice speaks life. It speaks hope. It speaks of the future. To taste his wonderful crab cakes and his homemade apple pie, and I want him to help me with Thanksgiving dinner again, and I want him to help set up the Christmas tree. He's the only kid that ever did. But I want mostly just to have one last warm hug and to hear, "I love you, Mom," as he walks out the door. The cost of not getting help is high. As you see, it will not just cost you your life. It will forever impact the lives of those who love you. We will never get over this, ever. There's a hole in our heart. What is it going to be filled with? Nothing. We can learn to live, but we can't ever be the same. If we hadn't loved him this much, it wouldn't hurt this much. Please don't make the crippling price of loving you that your family has to pay be the same that we've paid. You still have a choice. You're sitting right here. You have hope for a future, for God to help you, for God to use you. Hold on to that hope and get help now. Please, I promise you, Riley would want you to hear this message and he would want you to get help. Thank you.